Thanks everybody for joining us on this December SMAC meeting, our last meeting of the year. So it's good to see everybody, talk to everybody one more time before we close it out. We have had one request for an excused absence from Ms. Graham. So is there a motion to excuse Ms. Graham from this meeting?
I'll move to excuse. A second, Evan.
All right. All in favor, raise your hands. And Evan and Glenn, I cannot see your video feeds. Got it, Glenn. All right, that passed unanimously. Any corrections, edits, revisions to the meeting minutes from November? Nope. All right, I move to approve the minutes from the November meeting. Is there a second?
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
All right, that passes unanimously as well. Wayne, I'm gonna turn this agenda over to you to give us some updates and info on the hot topics and matters of importance.
Will do. Thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple staff updates. Unfortunately, Ashley Rogers has told us that she is leaving the city. She, as you recall, is the supervisor of our stormwater plan review group. She's going to be taking a position with Wake County. It is a good opportunity for her, so we wish her the best. We will be, we've gotten approval to advertise that position, so given how important that position is, we will be looking to fill that as quickly as possible. Related to the commission, as we mentioned last time, Ms. Graham is, her term is up. She has decided not to renew. So that does create a vacancy officially as of this meeting. There was a nomination made at the council meeting earlier this week, but no vote or action was taken on that. So we would anticipate that the position could be filled in January by council. And they are aware of the, in terms of the guidance that was adopted last year in terms of diversity proposals and other expertise. So, and they are taking that into consideration as part of the nomination process. A few hot topics, update on the Perry Sandford Federal Building illicit discharge compliance issue. I did send out an update to all of the SMAC members. Let me know if you have any questions on that. The update was the city has sent them a letter accepting their latest submittal as being in compliance with all city ordinances. They did submit information that was sealed by a professional engineer to attest that all illicit connections had been permanently plugged or removed and not further in use. So as we mentioned last time, because it is a federal building, the state DEQ is the official enforcement agency related to Clean Water Act compliance. And so the state does still need to make an official determination of compliance, which has not yet occurred. But let me know if there are any questions or comments on that or on any of the materials that I'd sent out.
Yes, I had a question. I don't know if it was just me or I wasn't reading the documents right, but I went through there and it looked like there's some conflicting information. That one letter said that, it appeared there were cross connections, but that was an error. But then the documentation about corrections that were made indicated that there were cross connections. So I still can't figure out if there really were, there were not cross connections.
Yeah, it was confusing. And there had been cross connections reported, and this was a number of years ago. And they went back and tried to identify why, when they investigated those cross connections, they found out many of them had not actually been illicit cross connections. the engineer investigated why that was the situation and found that on an original plan sheet for the building, one of the down pipes had been mislabeled, and the sanitary sewer pipe had been labeled storm and vice versa. So when they found connections to what was labeled the storm pipe, they assumed those were illicit. But when they did actual dye testing more recently to determine that, they found that the connections had been made properly, and it was actually just a labeling change. Now, when they went through and did a full-blown dye test throughout the building as a part of this latest investigation, they did find other illicit connections that had not previously been identified: the cooling water tower, a number of floor drains, and a roof drain. And in the latest documentation that they submitted, they not only had confirmed that the previously thought illicit connections were not there, but all of the additional new illicit connections that they found had also been corrected.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Wayne. That helps explain it. It makes sense now.
Glad to work. Any other questions on that? Okay, the next item is really just an FYI for now, but if you have any initial feedback, we'd welcome that. There has been a recent proposal by City Council. It came from Mayor Pro Tem Branch, actually, to suggest creating some type of a liaison arrangement between the Stormwater Management Advisory Commission and the Planning Commission, so that there would be a means of communication of information related, especially to rezoning issues that may have stormwater implications. I think the idea was raised maybe specifically for the Downtown South project because of the stormwater issues, and you all will hear more about that project specifically later on the agenda. But I think that has raised the issue that SMAC may have some input that would be beneficial to the Planning Commission. So at the staff level, we're still talking through what that might look like and the best way to manage that relationship. There is a similar arrangement between the Parks Board and the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Commission. Has a similar arrangement, so that we could use that as a model. And the liaisons do not attend each other's meetings, but they do have periodic touch points and conversations on coordination as needed. So that could be one model to use. But if you all have any questions or comments or thoughts on that, we'd be glad to take that into consideration. Otherwise, we can bring back a proposal to you in a future meeting and get your feedback on that.
It seems like a good idea to me. I don't see any downside to it.
I agree. I think that kind of communication could be very valuable.
And Wayne, that would be, you thinking one member from each commission? I guess how would that work, or what's the current model for that?
Yeah, I think the model on the other one I mentioned is that one member from each of the commissions is designated as a liaison, and they touch base periodically to cross-coordinate issues that may have an impact or interest on the other commission's work. Sure.
Yeah. So you're thinking like January, February, that'd be something that we would take up or take a look at?
Yes, we actually have a call, a meeting coming up with some members of the planning development department to talk about what that might look like. And they are bringing it up at the Planning Commission meeting as well to get their input and make them aware of it. So yeah, we can bring something back in January or February for you all to respond to.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks, Wayne.
Good, thank you. The next item is an update on the green stormwater infrastructure committee. And I'll turn it over and ask Kevin Boyer and Mark Senior to comment and give a quick update on what's happening there.
Yeah, it's pretty brief. The subcommittee has not met since our September meeting, but my understanding is that Tetra Tech is diligently working, putting together some of the materials that we're waiting to discuss with the intent of having that material ready for discussion at the January meeting. Have something we can actually chew on. But I'm going to turn it over to Kevin to provide a little bit more detail on that.
Thanks, Mark. There are, several components of what we're working on. One, the really active and largest one is the case studies for testing out the draft policy for use of GSI on city projects. We have explained in the past that we've picked two sites, the Chavis Park and the downtown office tower sites. And we have developed scenarios and costs for those and are applying them to the policy and the guidelines we develop. One thing that we're finding is that the guidelines and policy, draft policy, maybe aren't quite as workable as we'd hoped, which is the whole reason for going through this exercise. Is part of the reason for giving feedback to the process, but then also to provide templates for those for others to use later. So the process is working, but going more slowly than we'd hoped, and we plan to have a committee meeting in December and come back with a robust report out to the full commission in January. A part of that is getting ready for the commission to report out to City Council, which we should be on track to do that in the first quarter of 2021. Mark, I believe that's it. Thank you.
Great, and that's all we have in the, I'm sorry, I do have the notices prior to construction. There are two projects listed that we anticipate starting within the next 90 days. The first one is the demolition of two houses that were purchased as flood buyouts on Hillock Drive, 2100 and 2104 Hillock Drive. And that work will begin soon. And the second project is a drainage assistance project on Chapel Hill Road. And that's all we have on the staff update.
Sounds good. Thank you, Wayne. Wayne, on the next item with Downtown South, are you going to present first, or are you going to let Daniel jump into it?
Really, the only thing I wanted to say was that this was an item that was proposed by Commissioner Reverend Jamon Taylor. He's been very involved in some of the discussions related to the Downtown South rezoning project. He suggested that we bring this as an agenda item to the commission. We thought this was a good idea, and so we do have a representative of the development team who I believe you know, Jonathan, so I'll turn it back over to you, let you do the introduction.
Yeah, that sounds good, Wayne. Thanks. So we do have Daniel Wiebke with us today from McAdams, and he's going to be kind of giving us a rundown on the detailed conditions related to stormwater that are going into the rezoning agreement. First of all, Daniel, I really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today and give us a presentation on this. For members of the commission, I would ask that let's hold our questions until the end and let Daniel get all the way through his presentation so we can kind of get a nice complete picture of everything there. And then raise your hand, let me know if you do have questions at the end, and we can start working through those and have some discussion on this. And one other note, at this point, SMAC does not necessarily have a formal role in the rezoning process. So this is more of for information and discussion purposes on our end. We can go from there. But Daniel, if you're ready, we're looking forward to getting your presentation today.
Awesome. Yeah, no, I'm ready. I think Kelly was going to run the PowerPoint. All right, so I'm Daniel Wiebke, as Jonathan said, stormwater engineer, professional engineer in the state of North Carolina, starting working on the Downtown South project. Downtown South is a project that is being undertaken by multiple entities, but Kane Realty is the primary developer. So slide. So there's 7 major conditions that we've kind of talked through with Planning Commission and stakeholders. There's definitely been some stakeholder engagement, talking to some nonprofits and stuff, and I'll talk about that a little more later. But I'm going to show you where the sites are. I don't know if you're familiar with those. Some of the water quality conditions that we've talked about, the floodplain ones that we've committed to, very in-depth analysis of the site and the greater watershed, some transparency from the development team as the process moves forward, water quantity, and then partnerships and the longevity of the watershed beyond just the project itself. So I'll get rolling. Next slide. So you'll see here that there are 3 major tracks. There's area A, B, and C. As I'll show you later, areas A and C are on Walnut Creek. B is to the south of 40. It actually, drainage comes from area B, both to the northwest and to the northeast through linkage by Wildcat Branch, which is also, I believe, a FEMA recognized stream. So there's definitely natural water bodies and stormwater implications with this project. The total area between all 3 parcels, I think 148, 150 acres, something like that. So definitely a large project. Next slide. So in discussing a lot of the conditions, you'll notice up there in the top right, that's the full condition. Don't expect anybody to read all that. And I'm sure Matt Clune's on here. So if you need access to all of those, I'm sure that we can get you access to the full conditions. But I kind of wanted to summarize what they were. But you'll notice that starts on 10 because there are 9 other conditions not related to stormwater that the development team has been working with Planning Commission on and has proposed thus far that relate to transportation and other sort of things. So with that said, water quality, what we've agreed to do initially was to treat the first 1.34 inches, and that's the P90. So that's the 90th percentile storm for Raleigh. But then we had some external discussions with some stakeholders and another engineer, Chris Bass, who had written a letter on behalf of some of the neighborhood residents. And we've had great conversations with Chris, members of One Way and Partners for Environmental Justice and some other stakeholder groups, to name a few. But after having talked to them, we had also kind of stepped it up a tiny bit and said, well, you know what, since it seems like stream degradation is one of your big points and something that Chris Bass in the community was really worried about, we said, well, we'll go ahead and treat the difference in the 1-year storm pre to post, so make it no worse in that storm. Essentially, if for some reason there is a difference there between that and a greater difference than that and the 1.34 inches. Again, we will also be incorporating green stormwater infrastructure measures. We think that's very important to put those on site and to create educational opportunities to really not only leverage the development, but leverage the city of Raleigh's desire to push this program forward. Slide. So then again, like I said, there's major, Walnut Creek goes through sites A and C. there's a lot of floodway and floodplain on these sites. B obviously doesn't have any, but particularly site C, where so far that'll be a little bit denser development, and then area A, where you see major floodplain fringe areas. And so one of the implications is actually something that the SMAC had advised on last year, maybe, but that there's a text change coming for floodplain. So essentially we have adopted that, though the text change for floodplain is not through yet. We've gone ahead and said we'll be compliant with that. Essentially, not really doing anything in the floodway, but then in the floodway fringe, trying to reserve that for ground level uses. Really, the best thing to use there is parks. There may be minimal trails and, a picnic shelter or something like that, but really trying to leave the building footprints or not going to leave the building footprints outside of the floodplain and floodway fringe to prevent any kind of losses or obstructions to the floodplain. Next slide. So this is where it gets a little thicker. So as part of this, we're in rezoning right now, so we don't have all the details of everything everywhere. And so really what this thorough analysis is, and it actually carries on to another side, that's how many different things there are with it. We and the stakeholders had discussed, and in particular, I'll mention Chris Bass again, because he's represented a good many of them from a professional standpoint. He's also a stormwater engineer. So we've had really good discussions, and what our goal is to make things better, if at all possible, and certainly at the least not make anything any worse. And so with that, we talked about some different things, some different storms to look at, and what we wanted to do was say, well, we don't know everything now. At rezoning, there may be some site sketches, but there's not detailed analysis of all the on-site conditions. Just for 150 acres, that's a huge burden. So what we wanted to do was set up a framework in which we could look at what the development would do through the process and make good decisions. And so with that, we kind of did some if-thens and based that on what the analyses show as we move through those. So knowing that there's 3 sites, we may be at a more detailed stage with one of them than another one. So we're not going to know everything at site A when, we're working on C, but through that process, as site plans for different sites A, B, and C come in, we will be updating that analysis such that, we're constantly ensuring that we're doing what's best for the area. So with that said, the third analysis is a comprehensive stormwater analysis. We'll complete it prior to the first site plan, like it says, but then, like I also just said, we'll be updating it if, as things shift a little bit or this doesn't work on that site, but it's not meant to be a static thing. The analysis is going to include peak flows and water surface elevations, and then velocities. Velocities is key because it'll look at, stream degradation, erosion, that kind of thing, because we really want to preserve the health of those streams and Walnut Creek that traverse these properties. We're going to look at the 1, 2, 10, 25, and 100-year storm events for this. We're going to do hydrologic modeling. There'll be iterations from a couple directions. That's key here. So typical practice is we look at a storm that just rains down on the site all at once, or on the watershed all at once. But Walnut Creek is, as you'll see later, the points that we're looking at go as far down as Rose Lane. And I think at that point, it's about 23 square miles. So it's a pretty big watershed. It comes all the way up from Cary Town Center, down through our site and continues on until it gets to the Neuse River. But with that said, there's different storm events. You see those summertime flashy storms that may come from the south and west. Or you could have a tropical storm late summer, early fall that's coming from the south and east. Or, I don't know, something could come from just the south. So we wanted to kind of put that framework out there to say, hey, we don't know exactly what storms or what directions the storms are going to come from. But we're going to talk through that a little bit and figure out, what are the most telling and most would have the most effect on our site and the greater Walnut Creek watershed. From there, we're also going to look at the impacts of Lake Raleigh and Lake Johnston on the watershed. So one of the things is, and Wayne can talk more about this, but I know that there are some things being looked at with some of the impoundments that the city owns, whether modulating those prior to a storm or not would have impacts. So, we'll look at, hey, what does it look like if we were to draw this down? What does it look like if we didn't? So there's a lot of permutations of things, and we're going to try and hit a lot of them, but we can't hit all of them because there's a lot. Then from there, flood hydrographs, effects of culverts and backwater. So the culverts that, take Walnut Creek again from the Cary area down through our site. I mean, we're going to focus more so in the area of downtown south with South Saunders, Wilmington, Hammond, State Street, Garner Road, and Rose Lane. You'll see that on the next slide. But we're going to be looking at the whole watershed, just kind of zooming in on those particular culverts. So Kelly, next slide, please. So I just kind of talked about some of the major intersections. So some of these intersections were brought up by Chris Bass, and forgive my oversight. Actually, we have talked to Wayne and Ben a little bit from the city. So do give them credit. They have definitely talked to us a little bit and brought up some of the concerns, because Rose Lane is a city project currently where they're looking at some flooding, and just downstream of our site at between State Street and Garner Road, there's Rochester Heights neighborhood, which gets flooded in some events, both of which in the FEMA floodplain. But like I said, one of the goals here is we want to make the community happy. We want to make sure that we don't make anything worse, and where possible, we want to make it better. So you see those locations: South Saunders, which splits A from A and B to the west, and Site C to the east. Then Wilmington Street, just downstream of our site, Garner Street, just downstream of Wilmington, State Street, beyond Rochester Heights, and then Rose Lane, maybe a mile downstream, maybe a little more, but Rose Lane a good bit further downstream in Walnut Creek, down towards Walnut Creek softball complex, I believe. So then again, we'll be looking at water surface elevations, and velocities, and just generally the peak flow coming through there. One caveat here is that mitigation to pre-development flood conditions will be required if the analysis yields an increase greater than 0.04 between pre-development and post-development flood levels. That's something that's in the ordinance, but just kind of echoing that here to say, hey, this is kind of measurable, and beyond 0.01, 0.02, not to get too technical, sometimes that can just be a modeling thing. But once we start seeing something a little greater than that, that's actually measurable. You might actually see a real world impact from that. So that's where that came from. Next slide. So these are the points. Again, the first red area is South Saunders. The next red dot is, the next red dot is Wilmington. The next red dot is Garner, then State Street, and then the furthest to the right there is Rose Lane. Next slide. So another part of this is transparency. So as we're going through this process, what we're going to do is, once we've got calculations pulled together, obviously we submit to the city, but we want to also keep it, not jumping through hoops for people to get access to the information. So, plans, sealed calculations, that kind of thing, we'll host on the website. The website's actually live. If you go to the Downtown South website, at the bottom, there's this 36-page pamphlet, and actually the zoning conditions thus far are already in that pamphlet. So if you want to see the full list, they're there. Next slide. Water quantity, and this is probably the thing that the most people want to make sure doesn't shift or change too much. So water quantity is just, trying to make sure the peak discharges during storms do not get worse or create exacerbate problems that already exist or create new problems. We've already done some preliminary analysis and shown that in some situations, letting water out a little quicker in some areas may actually behoove the watershed so that it doesn't line up with other parts of the watershed. But in for other instances, it may not. So what we wanted to do was, build that variability into the ability of the development and the review process. So you'll see post-development peak runoff rate on areas A and B, mostly wooded, mostly undeveloped, will be limited for all standard design storms up to the 100-year storm. And they will be limited to a fair forested condition. So that's just, the whole property being wooded. So hopefully that will maintain minimal impact, if any, hopefully none, to the Walnut Creek there. Then the more impervious sites over there on Tract C to the east will be, on the east side, it's a little more developed. So we're going to create a 10% or greater decrease in all storms. And then I don't know that it's here, but the one just to the west, we're also doing the peak flow mitigation for the 1-year storm. Again, that's your channel forming storm, one where it happens more frequently than any others. So trying to make sure that those peak flows don't degrade stream health. And then lastly, if the comprehensive stormwater analysis shows that holding back the 10-year storm will hurt things, but we need to detain the 25, then that's what we'll do. So essentially, we've agreed to these conditions, and we want to do what's best for the creek because it's best for the creek, not just because it says that we're going to detain the 25-year storm, whether it's good or bad. So that's really the thought process that we have in mind here. Next slide. So then the last point here is partnerships and watershed longevity. So this is really just a commitment by the developer to want to positively impact the watershed. So what they've got here is essentially after the second site plan, they will start, 5 business days after the second site plan is approved by the city of Raleigh, they will put $150,000 in an account that can be used to match another grant to be implemented within Walnut Creek watershed. So they build a building or two, they start getting some revenue in, and then they're able to help fund other projects. This isn't related to our project. These are other projects in Walnut Creek watershed that would improve water quality, mitigate flooding, restoring streams, restoring wildlife habitat. So to put that in another light, they put the $150,000 in there, and then maybe a year or two later, or maybe there's a huge project that costs $1 million. Well, after multiple site plans, once the $150,000 builds up, it could build up to a maximum of $750,000. Now, what could then happen is somebody else, of course, comes in with 750, and they match that, and so you've got 1.5 million. So that could fund a project like, I don't know, raising a road that's flooding downstream, or making a culvert larger, or creating an impoundment that helps that helps with flooding, or not FEMA buyout, but that type of thing, removing the risk. And then wetlands restoration, stream restoration, all that kind of stuff. So we've been talking with Partners for Environmental Justice. There are certainly going to be other parties involved in this, but this is something that we've agreed to, and it's up to a maximum of $2.5 million. So, you know, there's $2.5 million through the life of this project and beyond that is up for grabs, as long as, you know, some matching funds are raised to kind of, you know, get double bang for your buck, I guess. So with that, I think that's the last slide. Oh, I'm sorry. This talks about a few other potentials. So you see the Walnut Creek Wetland Center that's down there, preserving more land for something like that, creating another one. Not that you necessarily need another one right there. You know, preservation, restoration, that kind of thing. And then the image to the right is a flow controller. So something like that it's a smart controller. So basically, if you were to hook this to some sort of larger impoundment, it is able to predict that rain's coming, draw down the impoundment before it comes, save room for flood water, and hopefully that will mitigate some of the damage that has occurred in the state. So with that I think is the last slide.
Cool, Daniel. Thank you very much for walking through that with us. That was really detailed. I'm sure that there are some questions out there. I have a couple myself, but I want to let other commissioners go ahead and ask questions if they have them right now. And I'm having a hard time seeing all of the. Oh, there it is. Perfect. So any questions from members of the commission right now for Daniel? Just raise your hand. I'll call on you. All right, tap in. Gotcha.
Hey, Daniel, thank you so much. That was incredibly thorough and very helpful to see. My question is really generally, maybe not just for you, but has a matching fund from a developer is that something we've done with the city of Raleigh before? Or is this is there any precedent for this?
I don't know that there is. This is something really creative. You know, as a stormwater engineer, don't get into the I keep joking it's a hedge fund, but into the money management. But it's something that we kind of determined with talking with PEJ, Chris Bass, and some other downstream stakeholders that, hey, you know, what about just some improvements to the community, stormwater related, but how do we do that? Because we were having a little bit of trouble trying to put a lot of conditions together, be super detailed. Yeah. Preliminary state. So it's kind of, hey, we're going to do at least this, plus we're going to have this money to help improve things that we can't really talk about right now because we don't know.
Well, so I do think that one of the things that we know generally with a development like this is that the increased traffic and just people being there puts a heavier weight on the infrastructure in the community generally, and whether that's our aging, you know, culverts or whatever else. And so, I mean, I think that that's great. On one hand, I have a reaction where I feel like it feels like a bribe. On the other hand, I feel like it's a great investment in the community. So I have a gut reaction either way, but I think it could be very impactful. But I just wonder about looking at that infrastructure that we know, especially in that neighborhood, is already aging, already suffering, and that we can't keep up already, basically. And I wonder about going ahead. I know we couldn't get the money earlier, but I wonder about ways to improve what's underneath the ground before building all of that on the ground that the city maintains, and if there's a section there.
So I would say, and stop me if I tread on toes, but I would say we plan on, you know, redoing utilities on our site. I mean, if you're talking about downstream utilities, that's not on our site, and certainly this money can be used for improving stormwater conveyance systems downstream. But again, that's got to be after some of our stuff. They don't have money until they built something.
Right. And yeah, I mean, and that makes sense. I just I mean, I know I've seen that in Raleigh, and I think we all have, when the downstream really suffers, even if everything is done right on the site. So that, you know, that's one of my areas of concern.
Right.
Yeah. Daniel, I just want to make sure I understand this correctly. That the idea with that fund is that that will be used to match other grants that are obtained. Is that
Yes.
correct? Yeah,
Yes.
so I think that that's pretty cool. Just having seen the way a lot of grant applications go and the way they come together for other nonprofits, oftentimes there are funding sources available, but it's very difficult to show that you have matching funds that would allow you to obtain those larger pools of money. So that's a pretty creative way to do it.
Well,
Yeah.
credit Chris with that. I mean, he mentioned it and I was like, that's a great idea. Let's do that. But I mean, knowing that, he and Amin Davis is with PEJ, who actually works with the grant. So there was some thought. There's definitely some thought behind this. It was, we certainly weren't trying to bribe anybody, but we wanted to say, hey, we're going to put some skin in the game. We want to provide more access to these grants, and as I said, double bang for our buck.
Sure. Yeah. So Wayne or Matt, just to follow up on Tappan's question, do you guys know if there is another precedent or model that's been used within the city for that? Or yeah, and Matt, you can go first.
Yeah. No, I don't believe. What's unique about what's happening here is the zoning condition is a legally binding agreement that binds the property owner of the piece of property to whatever stipulations are in here. And what the interesting thing and the creative thing, to your point, is it's set up just like a governance structure between the property owners and external stakeholders. And so the city is not like the escrow agent that holds the money, right? But there is some input from the city about the group makeup and how the decision is made of how to spend the money. But really, it's just kind of a public acknowledgement that there's going to be partnership between the future property owners, whoever they may be, and Partners for Environmental Justice. And it says they're chosen community. And so it's kind of a lot of the impetus is on, or a lot of the decision making is on Partners for Environmental Justice about who they're bringing to the table to facilitate the grant process. And the property owners and developers are required to contribute funds to match, basically. And I've not seen that done in the city or any other place in the county since I've been planning. And so, yeah, I'm not sure there's great precedent for this. I don't know, Wayne, if you have any additional insight.
I don't, Matt. I've not seen a precedent similar to this either. Thank you for your input, though.
That doesn't mean I think it's a bad idea. By the way, I think it's awesome to try new things. I was just curious about it.
Yeah, and all of this stuff is vetted by the city attorney's office and that type of thing. And so, they advise the city council on legal matters. And if they thought that something like this was contract zoning or a bribe or something like that, then of course we would not allow the receipt of such a zoning condition. But I think the way that the governance structure is laid out here is really holding two private parties accountable to this agreement. And the city has some oversight in how exactly the money is spent, I guess. But it's not exactly clear in the zoning condition. Like there's not that detailed of a procedure like written out here. So I think there's work and logistics to figure out exactly how that happens in the future. But they've agreed to do it, which is great.
Gotcha. Yeah, Evan, go ahead.
Thanks. So a couple of questions, I guess. Where can we get a copy of the conditions that you were showing there today?
DowntownSouth.com. Okay. If you go to, where's my mouse at? Actually, I will just show you right now. Can I share my screen with this?
That's fine. So let's see. What kind of performance guarantees will be in place, and who will be responsible for monitoring and maintenance of the stormwater BMPs that are put in place?
What's the first part again?
What kind of performance guarantees would be in place?
What do you mean by the performance guarantees?
The model is predicting that there will be no increase in runoff or whatever the performance metric is, and that does not come to pass. How do we, what recourse is there?
We haven't addressed that. What we have done is basically we've said, or not basically, that's in the zoning condition, the publicly available data. So all the calculations, all the plans will be available basically for public comment, more or less. And so I guess making sure, that there's the ability for anybody, we have to look at it, but then I guess they could raise the question with Wayne, Ben, the city, and say, hey, we don't agree with the way this was calculated. And then I guess that kind of puts a little onus on the city, but that's kind of where we're at. I guess they're acting as arbitrator.
Daniel, I think Evan was probably referencing more so like, let's say the model shows there is no increase in the water service elevation for a specific storm, but then perhaps there actually is for some reason or another. I think that's more along like an actual physical performance standard,
right?
Success criteria, something like that. But Wayne, I know you wanted to add something to that as well.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So once there's a stormwater related condition that is agreed upon and accepted, that becomes a regulatory requirement, just like any other regulatory requirement. It would then be part of the development review process. So we in our stormwater plan review would check the calculations, confirm that it meets those design criteria. And then as part of our regular stormwater control measures inspection program, we would check those on an annual basis, and the developer and owners responsible for submitting annual reports related to the performance of those devices.
Okay.
Right. That was going to be what I was going to say regarding operation and maintenance. Now, if we show that it's a 0.01 rise and it ends up being 0.02 in reality, I mean, their models all models are sometimes. So,
if I may, another question on this, and cross as a stupid question, but I think it other people may be wondering out this as well. You've got 77 acres of undeveloped land there that's part of this project. And could you just help us conceive of what the site looks like to develop? Has no rough conditions as today. But
sorry, you're breaking up a little bit.
Sorry. I'll stop my video. Maybe that'll help.
Yeah.
So 77 acres of undeveloped land converted to development. And I understand, you're not going to have 77 acres of pavement out there. But what does that look like where the stormwater runoff conditions are no worse than pre-development? You had a little inset in one of your slides that showed a cutaway with a stormwater storage device underneath a building. What's the vision for what this looks like in terms of those stormwater BMPs that achieve pre-development conditions for the hydrology?
Well, so for that, we have, as I stated in part of the presentation, and also one of the zoning conditions, we are going to be implementing GSI techniques, and a fair amount of them. So some bioretention, some cisterns. Actually, we're legally required per this zoning condition to put them in, all of them within the first 4, I think. So all of those types have to be in the first 4 site plans. And then to do some of the heavy lifting, there may be some concrete vaults there that just hold some water. Because like you said, there's 77 acres being developed, but there's also a good bit of floodplain there. So if we're not touching the floodplain, there may be the ability to do a little bit there. We said that we would not. Put buildings there, but that doesn't mean we couldn't grade it out a little bit, make some more floodplain storage there. Not saying that that's necessarily what we do, but or as I have on one of my other slides, leaving some there. We want to preserve the habitat, so it's kind of a catch-22 there. But yeah, there will probably be some big stormwater vaults that just hold the water, and we get a little bit of mechanical treatment. But the idea is to provide some public education opportunities. One of the ideas that we had floated, it didn't work, but we'd actually contact the public utilities department to see if we could collect all the stormwater and send it to the reclaimed water facility right there, but they don't have capacity, or they don't have the ability to do it there. So, I mean, we've thought about this, and I don't have all the answers, but we definitely want to put out some naturally intensive stormwater controls. And there's actually 2 ponds on site B that we could leverage for detention purposes.
Thanks. And last question, Wayne, on the city staff side, what's the expertise like in terms of reviewing models that are submitted?
Yeah, that's the part of our.
Are we matched pretty well between development and regulator in terms of that level of expertise?
I believe we are, Commissioner Kane. Yes, we've reviewed some preliminary submittals that have already been made, given some review comments back, and had some conversations with McAdams and the developers. So yes, I believe we do have the expertise to do a good job reviewing the submittals, being able to comment on those.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
All right, other questions for Daniel? Yeah, Wayne.
I certainly want to give commissioners first choice, but I had a question, and then there's actually one in the chat that came through that you may or may not be able to answer. Daniel, is a question about if there's leftover funding, are there other opportunities for how to use that? Do you know how that would be worded in the agreement?
If there's leftover funding, quarter shall be equal to exceed. I don't know. My understanding is that it's to improve things in the Walnut Creek watershed. There's no specific dates in here other than by December 31st, 2031. So 10 years from tomorrow, there will have at least been $750,000 passed through the fund. Yep.
Okay. And I guess I'll just add that I know from a city capital improvement project, we've identified a number of potential project opportunities in that vicinity. Obviously, it would be up to the community group as to whether they found those to be a high priority for that funding, but the city certainly has projects that we could help provide some co-funding as well.
Yeah, and I'm happy to hear that. I think that was somewhat of the intent. That's kind of where this came from too. Is we can sit there and we can hold back. We can contain the 100-year storm and capture all the water, and it would cost $20 million. Or the road downstream that it floods could be elevated for $1 million. And so what we really want to do is is do what's best for the community, but money consciously, not just the developer's money, but everybody's money. So it's kind of everybody's got a little skin in the game.
Just one follow-up, if I could, Daniel. Appreciate y'all and the developer responding to some of the earlier comments that we'd given on the conditions and putting the mitigation language in there, the timing of the storms as we discussed. The one item I think we suggested that I didn't see in there that maybe still be outstanding is a volume matching criteria for green stormwater infrastructure. Is that something that you all have discussed and may still be on the table?
I think it's possibly still on the table. I'm not saying that it couldn't be in the future, but not knowing enough, certainly, as you know, we did one quick preliminary analysis on one of the sites, one of the more intensive sites, and there was just no way to infiltrate. I mean, I shouldn't say no way to infiltrate, but it was going to be really hard, and that just put a giant wrench in because we came in wanting to. If we had good soils, that would be a condition right now. But it's just not. We don't want to lock up the whole development and say that we'll do it, and then come back in a year and say we physically just can't do it. So some of these conditions, these other conditions came from with the peak flow matching at the 1 and the 2, because we knew that we couldn't agree to that quite yet. But what we can do is try and meet some of the intent of that. We'll use green stormwater. We'll try and preserve natural habitats and treat water as much as we can and manage the peak flow, but we may not be able to do it all in the same practice.
Great, thanks. That's all I had to ask, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Yeah, sounds good. So Daniel, a couple of questions I had for you, and I looked through that preliminary downstream impact analysis, and there's a couple of things that kind of stick out to me in there that I just wanted to get your thoughts on as a consulting engineer. The first one is that I think that the total area of the downtown south development is 1.4 or 1.5% of the size of the larger Walnut Creek watershed to that point, or to a couple of the study points.
Yep.
So it's relatively small, compared to the larger watershed or your points that you're analyzing downstream. And so with that downstream impact analysis and some level of detention on all 3 parcels, you're able to show, pretty low impact to discharges and water surface elevations for most of the storms analyzed. A little bit of my concern or question would be that what happens to adjacent parcels, or what happens when adjacent parcels are also developed and redeveloped. So, downstream impact analysis for this project, again, small watershed or small study area relative to the larger watershed, but we start adding in additional study areas, additional development, redevelopment. And that stuck out to me a little bit, just I think that's something we see across the city right now, where one small pocket of redevelopment or development doesn't show much of an impact, but what is that cumulative effect?
Right.
And so just what are your thoughts on the cumulative effects, and then how could we build on some of the work you guys are doing and have already done to evaluate that or mitigate that?
To mitigate that, well, so one thing is and I don't remember the code off the top of my head. Wayne may be able to, but there's a certain percentage that if you're smaller than that percentage of the watershed contributing, then you don't have to do that because you're so small. So we just threw that out the window and said, we're going to look at it no matter what. We're going to look at, what our impact is because we are so small. But generally the methodology is if you're less than, I think, and I'm pulling Durham's reg, but I think in Durham, if you're less than 10%, you don't ever look at that. And I don't know what Raleigh's, I think it's 5%, Wayne?
I think it's 5%, correct.
Yeah, then you don't even look at that because you're so small that you couldn't have that great of an impact. But we're saying we are a big development and there is cumulatives there. So we're going above and beyond with that. And I think, we're going to say, we'll look at that. That may be something we look at a little bit, but we're also hoping that any redevelopment is going to, make things no worse as well. Now, I understand no worse if my 0.01 and your 0.01 and your 0.01, everybody's 0.01 becomes something, but I don't know that I have a great answer.
Sure. Yeah.
Consider it, but yeah.
Well, and so let me follow that up. I guess would there be opportunities? So you guys are going to have to build out a pretty detailed H&H model. So is there an opportunity to start building on that? And this is something sort of on this, I think, city side and SMAC side of things we need to talk through a little bit more as well. But to take that model and start building out more of a detailed watershed model, not just looking at that downtown south area, but sort of larger.
The model we're using goes all the way down to the Neuse River. It's actually the FEMA model. I think Dewberry did it. So we started from that, and no watershed. Like I said, it's 23 square miles to Rose Lane, but no watershed is greater than 100 acres. So there's a lot of.
Yeah, it's pretty high resolution. Yeah. Pretty high res.
So there's definitely the ability to look at that kind of thing, but at what point do you differentiate? Yeah, we had no impact, but it's all the other developments. So if we do say the water surface is 200 and then we put ours in and it's 200.01 or 199.99 and then we put in everything else, well, we just saw that it is everything else that does it. So who then mitigates that? We'll try to do some, but I think that's also where the 2.5 million matching can come from is mitigating that. I also know that I'm working on Cary Town Center just upstream, another Walnut Creek one, and Cary is using a swim model as the basis for their development review now. So maybe it's something that we look at with the city and say, hey, we know that there will be some redevelopment, and with that, some people will detain. But I think that really that's a larger conversation, and I personally and technically I'm very interested in it, but that's aside from my client and this side, I think.
Sure. Yeah. And I think some of it's on the planning side and would require some more discussion, but that is a point of thought. And I think it needs more discussion. Just how do we address and think about and plan for the cumulative effects of, I think, some of the additional growth and redevelopment that downtown south is going to drive in that part of it. And Wayne, I think you were going to add something there. So if you can jump in here now if you'd like.
Yeah, thanks. I was just going to make a quick point that our standard analysis assumes rainfall falls over the entire watershed at the same time, which is often not the case when we have storms that may be, say, moving from west to east. So that concern that the timing could change the outcome of the results is what spurred the condition that they've agreed to look at different timing patterns in storms as part of their analysis. Mm-hmm. So we believe that will help.
Yeah, gotcha. Any other questions right now for Daniel on the downtown south rezoning conditions? All right, I don't see any other questions right now. So Daniel, thank you very much for taking some time and walking through that with us. I definitely learned a lot. It helped, I think, give me a little better understanding of all of the effort that both the developer side as well as the stakeholder side have gone through to reach something that's going to benefit both parties. And I also just want to mention again that this was a suggestion and request from Reverend Taylor. So I do appreciate him thinking that this was a good thing for us to take up within our meeting today. So thanks again, Daniel. Really appreciate it. And I think we've got linear asset management as our next item on the agenda. Yes, with Ms. Maranta.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. Good to see you all virtually today, and thank you for giving us some time to share progress on our MS4 asset management program. I'm joined today by Chris Nesbitt with CDM Smith. Chris is in CDM Smith's Raleigh office and has been developing asset management programs for over 20 years. We're excited to have the CDM Smith team on board for this effort. And I think Kelly's going to share the presentation for us. Thank you, Kelly. Can you go to the next slide, please? Okay, so the agenda for the presentation. I'll start off with an overview talking about what is asset management, what assets are we managing, and what are our system challenges. And then I'll turn it over to Chris to talk about our phase 1 asset management project, which kicked off in July. And then we'll discuss next steps, and we welcome your feedback. So we have time at the end for questions and discussion. Next slide, please. Okay, so what is asset management? And we'll start with the definition in the box, and then we'll talk about what that means for Raleigh Stormwater. So asset management is a way of doing business that allows utilities to achieve the desired level of service, an acceptable level of risk at the optimal life cycle cost. So you may be asking, well, what is this way of doing business and how is this different from what we've been doing for many years? So in actuality, we have been doing many pieces of this asset management process. So what we're doing with the asset management program is we're building upon what we've already been doing, and also developing in a more formal way, a way to evaluate priorities and system risk. So we'll just spend maybe a few minutes going through this asset management process that in the circle on the right-hand side of the slide, and talk about then what that means for Raleigh Stormwater. So asset management starts with a plan. That's the green piece in that circle. And this is our phase 1 project. So we're developing a framework for setting priorities on where to get condition assessment information and where to do rehabilitation. And Chris is going to talk more about that phase 1 project. Next, asset management involves going out and getting actual condition information. So what condition are our assets in, and how do we do that cost effectively? That's a big part of the program. Next is risk evaluation. So once you know the condition of the assets, you want to evaluate the risk in your system and look for ways to reduce that. So you want to go out and fix the assets that are in the worst condition and that are most critical to the system. Next is renewal and replacement planning. So what is the most cost-effective way of repairing assets? What can we do in-house, and what do we have to give to a contractor? And if we have to give it to a contractor, what's our most cost-effective means for doing this? And lastly, going out and maintaining the assets. So this is the asset management process that we're developing. And like I said, we've been doing little pieces of this for many years. And what we're doing with the program is we're formalizing this process. We're adding the planning and cost analysis and risk reduction pieces, and then ramping up the program because we have a goal to be more proactive. Right now, we are reacting to problems as they occur, and our goal is to get out in front of those problems and fix them while they're small. All right, next slide, please. So in other words, asset management is about making smarter decisions related to utility management. And why are we doing all this? We're doing this for to provide better customer service. Failing infrastructure has potential to impact the public in a negative way, and we don't want that. So we're doing all this to improve the service we provide our customers. And in addition to that process that we talked about on the previous slide, there are other components to a successful asset management program. First is investing in people. We have, it's really the people who run the program. So as we go our program, we're going to invest in training for our staff. Next is knowing your assets, their location and condition. This is something that our GIS and TFS staff have been working on for many years in the asset inventory, and we'll be ramping that up through the asset management program. Third is employing technology to track and analyze assets and predict problem areas. We want to make data-driven decisions on where to invest public funds, and we want to utilize technology to help us manage the data and make decisions more effectively. And lastly, improving processes. This is a big part of our asset management program. It's the processes that tie together the people, the data, and the technology, and keep the program running. So we're always looking for ways to do that more effectively and improving upon what we do. Next slide, please. Okay, so sometimes it's easier to define something by talking about what it's not. So we have this slide talking about what asset management is not. It's not just a piece of software. It would be nice if we could open up a software package and say, hey, here's our program, but it's not that simple. You need the people and the processes and the data to keep it running. Asset management is not a one-time exercise. If you recall the circle on the first slide, it's a continual process. Prioritizing your assets, going out and getting condition information, and then making repairs. Asset management is not one size fits all. We're developing a risk model for our system, and it's based on and customized to our data. And lastly, asset management is not done in a silo. We've got a core asset management team, and we're also working closely with other groups across the stormwater program and the city. Next slide, please. Okay, so we talked about what asset management is, and we'll talk about the constructed assets that are that we're focusing on for this phase 1 effort. We are focusing on the city maintained assets in the city right away. So for example, that's pipes and culverts, inlets, junctions, pipe inlets and outlets. And for example, if you look at the pipes, we have 1,600 miles within the city limits and 600 miles in the right of way. And we're focusing on those 600 miles for the asset management program. Next slide, please. Okay, so our MS4 system does have some challenges. We know we have aging infrastructure, and we've had some recent failures, such as the Newton Road failure shown in the picture on the right. Next, we have a large amount of growth in our system relying on that old infrastructure. Raleigh is one of the fastest growing areas in the country. The population density is increasing, and there's a large amount of growth relying on this old infrastructure, which leads to our next challenge. Our asset condition is unknown, and we need to go out and inspect it in a cost-effective way. And funding is a challenge. And this is not uncommon as for any municipality with aging infrastructure. We have a challenge. We need to get better understanding of our funding requirements that will allow us to create a more proactive program. And with that, I'll turn it over to Chris Nesbitt with CD & Smith to talk about our phase 1 project.
Thanks, Barbara. Okay, so there were 3 important questions that we wanted to make sure we answered as part of the phase 1 project. And those are, what is the basis for funding needs? Where to go spend the money? What are our priorities? And then how to proceed from here and getting into the details. So I'm going to be talking more about each one of these. Next slide, please. So first, the basis for funding. The basis in general, the main basis is the GIS data, and the whole team is really delving into that data, looking at assets and length and age and material and ownership right now, and I'm going to talk more about that in a minute. And then the second basis, we're starting with some best practice assumptions for funding, and then we're going to refine those throughout the project, which is going to end next summer. And I'll talk more about those best practice assumptions in a minute as well. And then third, we'll be looking more at staffing and resources to maintain the program and move more towards the preventative maintenance, like Barbara mentioned, and away from emergency and reactive maintenance. And for resources, we'll be looking more at like what, if any, technologies are needed that would be good to invest in to improve the efficiency of data collection. Okay, next slide. So in terms of the GIS data, even before we kicked off this project, the city staff were working really hard in preparation for this project to determine ownership and age of the assets. And what you see here is the first draft of the age results. And so on the chart on the right, you can see the black column is pre-1960 pipe. That's about 20% of the system. And then the colors match the map on the left. So you'll see that the black on the left, you can see most of it lies in the downtown area and inside the 440 belt line. And then the blue and the green colors are the newer pipe. And you'll see on the map on the left that most of the blue and the green is on the outskirts of the service area where the newer development's occurring. So a huge effort's gone into already to improving the GIS, and it will continue. Next slide, please. I wanted to go over a couple of those best practice assumptions that we're providing now and we'll be refining with two examples. First is the condition assessment. So we're right now, based on what we know, we would recommend assessing 10% of the system per year for the next 10 years. So in 10 years, Raleigh would know the condition of all of their assets. The cost of doing that depends a lot on whether you need to clean the pipe before you can look at it and see what condition it's in. That can get expensive. So right now, we're assuming 30% of the pipes would require cleaning in order to properly assess them. And when you put all that together, your result is $1.6 million per year in annual funding as an initial estimate. And then on the rehabilitation side, I usually recommend a minimum of 1% of rehabilitation per year. And that's based on a theory that a pipe will last 100 years. And so if you rehab 1% a year, in 100 years, you will have made it through your whole system. And then in year 101, you can be rehabbing the pipe that went in today. Now, Raleigh and many other utilities have not been investing in 1% rehab per year. And so we started with an assumption that 1.5% per year would need to be done. And again, the costs can vary depending on a lot of things, but using an average cost of $150 a foot, that result would give you $8 million a year in annual funding needed to rehab the system. Now, you might recall from last month that Scott went over and Raftelis went over the preliminary budget numbers. And those, if you go to the next slide, those were not showing that we were delving this deep into assessment and rehab. But like I said, we are going to be refining the assumptions throughout this project. We're going to be looking at ramping up the funding over multiple years, and we'll be looking at exploring leveraging in-house staff in order to reduce the costs. Okay, next slide. So in addition to the basis for funding estimates, a huge part of our phase one program is prioritization, where to go look, where to spend the money. And I'm going to talk about three major points. The first is the city's CMMS system, which is the maintenance management system data. And then I'll talk more about the risk framework. And then Barbara is going to talk more about coordination with associated efforts. So next slide. Okay, the city's maintenance management system is called CityWorks, and the city's been working really hard over the last few years to get as much data as possible into that work order system. And if you hit this next slide, what that can allow us to do is make things like a heat map, which is shown here. So this is taking the blue dots on the left are work orders from the city's system. And we can look at what kind of work orders, what kind of work is happening, and then we can develop a heat map where the red area is saying this is where you're spending all your time on maintenance and fixing problems. And that kind of information can really help you prioritize and focus your efforts in those red and orange areas more so than in the blue and the green on the outside. Okay, next slide. So that kind of information is going to be used in our risk framework. And in general, our risk framework is shown in the matrix here, which is comparing likelihood of failure and consequence of failure. So we're going to be giving every asset in the system a likelihood of failure, which represents condition. How likely is it to fail? A 1 would be good condition, not very likely to fail, and a 5 would be poor condition, likely to fail. And we'll also be giving it a consequence of failure. So what is the consequence if that asset fails? With a 1 being low consequence of failure, so that might be a small pipe on the end of a neighborhood court fails. And 5 would be a high consequence of failure, which would be a large pipe under a major road or near a critical facility like a hospital, which would have a big impact if it failed. Okay, so ideally, we would want to base likelihood of failure, I think Barbara mentioned this, off actual condition assessment information. And this project is setting up the city to gather that information. But like we mentioned, that might take up to 10 years to get the information on all the assets. So for right now, we can use surrogate factors like age and material and like those heat map I just showed you to help prioritize where to go collect that information. So we're going to the right areas in year 1 and year 2 of that 10-year plan, and we're going to areas that we're not as concerned about in year 9 and 10 of that condition assessment plan. Okay, the risk framework is going to prioritize the individual assets. So there'll be a list of all the assets and they will fit into one of these boxes. But then we're going to make projects, okay? And the projects are going to be put together in a way that makes sense, that takes into account the city's stormwater goals. It will look at triple bottom line factors like economic growth and environmental stewardship and social justice. And it will look at coordination with other city efforts as you develop those projects. So you'll kind of have a factual engineering-based priority list, but then the projects will be put together considering other factors in those coordinated efforts. So for example, if the pipe is critical, so it's a 5, and it has a severe defect, also it's in that red 5.0 box, we're going to recommend that be fixed immediately. But in general, you don't want to go out and spend money rehabilitating a pipe that needs to be upsized, that needs to be replaced with a larger size pipe. And so that's where the coordination with the watershed planning studies comes in. And Barbara's going to talk now a little bit more about that. Next slide.
Thank you, Chris. It's important to coordinate what we're doing with asset management and watershed planning. Like Chris said, we need to look for opportunities to prioritize and solve problems together in order to stretch our investment dollars. We definitely don't want to be going out and rehabbing a pipe only to need a capacity upgrade a few years later. So what we're going to be doing is overlaying our watershed planning priorities with asset management and look where we have some synergies and where we can combine efforts. And then once we have our stormwater priorities set, we can start coordinating with other departments. So for example, if Raleigh Water has a project to replace water and sewer in downtown, we can talk with them about adding stormwater potentially to that project so we can coordinate efforts and potentially save some funding. Next slide, please. Another area of coordination is with our Stream and Riparian program. This asset management decision-making framework can be applied in the same way to Stream and Riparian. Just like we look for pipe segments in poor condition, we can look for stream segments with severe erosion that may be impacting public safety, or that would provide good opportunities for water quality enhancements. So this project will help us develop a framework that can also be applied to the natural assets. We do have a project upcoming to develop this framework in a joint study with USGS and NCSU. So more to come on that. Next slide, please.
Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit more about our third question now, which was how to proceed. And I wanted to hit 3 examples of this. The first is leveraging software that the city already owns and leveraging the city's IT staff. So that CityWorks maintenance management system I mentioned that folks are using at the city has a module called Operational Insights. It's currently not in use in the city, and the IT department is very excited about becoming more knowledgeable in it. And we are going to use that risk framework, that this asset management program that the city already owns, to house our risk framework. And that way, too, this program will be all set up for the city to continue it. So like Barbara said, it's not a one-time deal. We want to make sure when we go away that the city staff has some support from IT and can continue the program on their own. That's the plan. Okay, secondly, we're currently performing a gap assessment on data and technology needs. So that's how best to obtain the data, store the data, track the data, and seamlessly feed the data into this risk framework and into this city-owned software that I just mentioned. And thirdly, we'll be looking more at how to proceed with condition assessment. If you could go to the next slide. The city has made some major improvements over the last couple of years in gathering condition assessment data in-house with both transportation field services staff and city stormwater staff working together to make this happen. So they developed a process for pole camera inspection, which basically drops a camera quickly down to get it's like a screening tool to see, is it things look good or does it look like something might be wrong? And then you can go to the next step, which is more difficult and more expensive to obtain, which is the CCTV inspection using the robotic camera shown here. But then the transportation field services staff can go in with that and collect really good condition assessment data of the pipes. And the city also took the step of getting all the staff trained in an industry standard coding of pipe condition. And that's going to allow us to take all their results, both from the past few years and in the future, and feed them into this risk framework much easier. And finally, as we're going to identify some repairs that will be large and need to go into the CIP program, but to the extent feasible, we'll want to do those repairs in-house. And so we'll be working closely with the transportation field services staff when developing the system repair plan. Next slide. And so at the end of phase 1, which again will be next summer, we will have an annual rehabilitation and funding target set. We will have a risk-based prioritization framework, an initial list of the highest priority assessment projects, a plan to maximize in-house resources for condition assessment and repairs and rehab, a management system to store the information and support the risk model, and the tools to coordinate with the watershed planning program. Next slide.
Okay, I'll close it out with the visioned next steps after phase 1, and then we'll open it up for discussion and feedback. So at the end of phase 1, we'll be ready to move into condition assessment of our highest priority projects. We can begin coordination with our watershed planning efforts and determine whether we need to rehab or replace certain pipes. And we envision continuing program assistance by continuing to work on our data and enhancing the completeness of the data, improving the efficiency of our data collection processes and technology, and also documenting standard operating procedures, which will help us to become more efficient. All right, I think that's it. Kelly, is that the last slide? Yes. All right, we welcome any discussion and feedback. Thank you.
Great. Thank you guys very much for the overview and updates on the asset management program. Are there any questions from commission members right now? All right. I'm not seeing any questions at the moment. So thank you guys very much. We really appreciate the effort and time on the presentation.
Thank you.
All right, Dale, looks like you're next up on the agenda for some drainage assistance projects. Are you ready to take us through those?
I am. Let me go ahead and share my screen with you.
Great, thanks.
So let me know if you see it.
Yeah, we got you.
You got the slide up? Okay, yeah. I'm going to go through our monthly or bi-monthly periodic review of pending DA projects for recommendation of approval to City Council. So we'll look at so far in fiscal year 21 what we've approved, and then look at 2 pending projects up for approval today. Locations map, project requests, and funding. So let's get started. So we've had 4 approved projects thus far in fiscal year 21. Those were presented to SMAC back in September. Cambridge Woods Way, Newbold Street, Fairley Place, and East Jameson Road. Those 4 projects totaled $643,000 of the $1.5 million of fiscal year 21 funding, that leaving the remaining balance in fiscal year 21 of $857,000. Pending projects, you have the full list of prioritization model ranking and pending projects list in your backup. Here shown on the screen is the top 25. Today we'll be looking at the top 2, 729 Hunting Ridge Road and 720 Beaver Dam Road. Sorry for the mistyping and of Beaver Dam Road. Beaver Dam is actually 2 words. When we'll fix that in the slides as we move forward. These 2 projects are actually relatively new projects. They did not appear on the pending list back when the pending list was presented in SMAC, presented to SMAC in September. These 2 projects were made aware to us, made known to us actually in September after some significant rainfall events that were experienced in the city. Location of the 2 projects, you can see on the location map, 720 Beaver Dam Road, located sort of in West Raleigh inside the Beltline, and 729 Hunting Ridge Road, located in North Raleigh, just south of 540. So with that, we'll get into sort of the 2 projects. 729 Hunting Ridge Road has erosion that is threatening the structure of the residents there at 729 Hunting Ridge Road. Plat date was 1972. The house was built in 1977. A couple of the pictures there, you can see the erosion that's occurring right sort of at the foundation of the supports of the sunroom there on the back of the structure. That erosion is within 10 feet of those supports of that sunroom. So that is what's driving this project, the score and the public safety threat for this project to be the #1 rated project at this point in time. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to stop me at any time, or you can wait to the end. Either way, works for me. The project will stabilize the stream bank approximately 80 linear feet there where it threatens the structure. Given the change in elevation and the proximity of the structure, most likely done with imbricated rock wall, resloping and revegetation in the vicinity of the structure. So that's 729 Hunting Ridge Road. Next project, 720 Beaver Dam Road. You can see there through the GIS, the 24-inch RCP pipe actually runs beneath the structure at 720 Beaver Dam Road. Platted in 1960, built in 1964. Property owner actually engaged a CCTV camera company to video this pipe as they started to see some sinkholes in the yard and near the foundation of the home. That video was sent to us for review and showed some longitudinal cracking and some ovaling or egging sort of shape of the concrete pipe below the home, showing signs that pipe is is beginning to fail, and most likely will fail in the near term, if not addressed. This project will reroute the pipe around the structure, and providing as much open channel where possible. We're not conflicting with utilities or where space is adequate to do so. The subsequent old pipe will be blocked and filled with concrete or flowable fill, such that the threat of that pipe collapse no longer exists. And like this project and the previous project, as part of the drainage assistance program, we will acquire public drainage easements that will be dedicated by the homeowner for both projects. Just a funding overview: 729 Hunting Ridge Road. Estimated project cost of $180,000. Beaver Dam Road, estimated cost of $87,000. So $267,000 for these two projects for this period of review. And given the 4 projects that were approved in September, gives us a remaining fiscal year 21 balance of $590,000. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions, happy to flip back through any of the slides for those questions.
Yeah, are there any questions from commission members for Dale on the Hunting Ridge Road project or the Beaver Dam Road project? All right, Dale, I'm not seeing any questions on either one of those. Actually, I've got one from Evan. Go ahead, Evan.
Yeah, real quick on the Hunting Ridge Road project. Will stabilization of that stream bank result in any downstream velocity increases that might start to jeopardize or create erosion conditions a little further downstream? Looks like there's a couple more houses that are close to that stream, maybe not as close as the first one.
Correct. There are a couple houses close, and we've actually done an old drainage petition project a little bit further down with one of these houses to do some stream bank stabilization. With all of our projects, when we look at the design, we have our design consultant look at any potential downstream impacts and doing a shear stress and velocity analysis as part of the design to make sure that if velocities are increasing, they're increasing within a threshold that's allowable, that we wouldn't expect to see any downstream issues as a result.
Okay. And there's a looks like a stormwater pond upstream on the complex on this. Is there any issues happening there that are significant to this project? Or
no, there's actually a couple upstream SCMs, regulated SCMs, and we have not checked those yet, but we can work with our SCM inspectors to make sure that their annual inspections are actually in order, and we've received those and have no issues.
Thanks.
All right, any other questions for Dale on either of these drainage assistance projects? All right, well, I think in that case, is there a motion to approve the projects at 729 Hunting Ridge Road and 720 Beaver Dam Road?
Motion to approve.
All right, we've got a second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye, my video is not working.
Gotcha. All right, I'm going to say that's unanimous, Wayne. And thank you very much, Dale.
Thank you, Commission.
All right, Justin, we've got a few minutes left to get into the Rainwater rewards projects again, if you are ready to go.
I'm bringing back the 2 green roof projects from the November meeting. The commission requested additional information be brought back to the December meeting. So I'll run through these very similar slides, but some changes to both. Next slide, please. The first project, as you recall, was the Smokey Hollow project off P Street. It's a 2,000 square foot green roof, eligible for 90% reimbursement. Next slide.
Next slide, please. Next slide. The commission at the last meeting requested pretty much three things for this project. Requested educational signage be included in the scope. There was a request for some language in the maintenance agreement to address fertilization concerns for the green roof, and then also just a general re-examination of the overall costs. And so you'll see here in this projected cost, or this revised projected cost outline, that signage was included as part of the project. They were willing to include educational signage. It's a nominal increase in the overall project cost, and I'll show some additional details of what they're proposing as we move forward. The second thing I wanted to also point out is in an attempt to both reduce total cost and also to slightly improve the water quality metric, they did remove two costs which staff felt were eligible for reimbursement, but removed. That's the $37.50 for the roof metal, the edge restraint roof metal, and the fall protection, and then also the management of this portion of the development. So that revises the overall request, or overall project cost, from $69,500 to $62,550. $65,900, $65,400, and the requested reimbursement $58,860 is 90% of that new cost. Next slide, please. You can see the small change in the nitrogen metric there. Previously, it was 224,194 pounds of nitrogen removed per year. It has gone down slightly. Next slide, please. And staff in between this meeting and the last meeting had discussions with the applicant and Living Roofs Inc., which is the contractor who installed this green roof, and developed a potential clause to add to the maintenance agreement to limit fertilization to a annual application of a slow release pelletized fertilizer at a rate not to exceed what's stated here. If the commission approves of this language, staff can ensure that this is incorporated into this green roof and any future green roof project that's approved. Next slide. This is a graphic provided by the applicant. You can see in the green roof is pretty much this entire frame just above on that first level roof. And so the permanent signage would be over there on the left next to that little side auxiliary door. That area is now primarily seating, probably not used right now, but primarily seating for eating and somewhat of a park area. It is the site is limited in space along the front. It's on the north side of the property, just on the side of the outdoor seating area. All right, next slide. The changes didn't move a whole lot with the metric, but as you can see, it is pretty much where it was when compared to other green roofs when we met last month. Next slide, please. All right, this is once again a 10-year maintenance period and requires a land use restriction. And next slide, is there any questions about the Smokey Hollow green roof application?
Yeah, Evan, go ahead.
Justin, did you get any sense from the consultant about how typical that fertilization rate is for a green roof?
I was when we met virtually with the installer, who Living Roofs is the contractor for both of the projects we're presenting today, and they're one of the only ones that really install these within the state, and they that is their recommendation that they give for their green roofs, and stood by that.
Yeah, I'll just make the observation that 11 pounds of 9% nitrogen is 1 pound of nitrogen applied annually and we're expecting 1/3 of a pound at most to be removed. To me, that takes away any of the nitrogen removal benefit of the project. And
their language did provide a range of I think it was 5.6 pounds to the 11 there, but it's still that we took the range out and said not to exceed.
If I had kind of a follow-up question, I probably should know the answer to this, but I don't. But in regard to state standards for using green roofs as a stormwater management practice, do they support or not support fertilizations of green roofs? I mean, back in my day, we didn't discuss fertilizing a green roof, but that may have changed. So I just was curious as to what the state stormwater BMP SM criteria is for a green roof for fertilization.
I'm not aware that the state's NDC calls out fertilization directly. That question was for staff.
Any other questions for Justin on 417 West P Street? All right, is there a motion to approve the proposed, or I should say completed green roof project at 417 West P Street at this point? All right, so it doesn't look like we've got a motion to approve this one. I guess I'd ask the commission, is it, at this point, do we want to table it for now? It sounds like, at least it appears, we need to have some more discussion about how we view the green roofs as part of the program.
Yeah, I mean, I've got two concerns. One, that the cost benefit on it is just doesn't make me feel very good, and the other, the idea of fertilizing it. I agree with Evan on that we're kind of defeating the whole purpose. One of the purposes of the program. It's more quality and quantity, but to me, any fertilization's bucking that concept.
Gotcha. Any other thoughts on that right now from other members of the commission? All right, Justin, I think it looks like we're gonna hold on this one for now, and we need to think about how we do the green roofs, perhaps going forward.
All right, we can move on to 515 Mill Street. It's a residential property, eligible for 75% reimbursement. The commission had requested a reevaluation of the total cost, similar to the first project. In the meantime, the applicant has attempted to obtain several additional bids. They were not successful in finding another contractor who was able to provide a bid. They did provide staff with their due diligence efforts in this endeavor. They have totally reworked the scope and the cost of this project. The applicant worked with Living Roofs to expand the footprint from 1,400 square foot to 1,900 square foot, and to reduce the total cost from 41,000 down to 29,000 roughly. Primarily by eliminating some costs that staff felt were not eligible, and also with the spirit of trying to improve that water quality metric. Next slide, please. Nothing really changed with the design other than the overall footprint. Next slide, please. You'll see here the main change here was a cost that was previously listed as the roof preparation membrane. After discussions with, once again, the applicant and the contractor Living Roofs, some of the membrane costs, while were thought to be part of the green roof membrane, were actually part of what would be used for a traditional flat roof. So staff felt that was not an eligible cost, so that was removed. The applicant went back to the drawing board with with living roofs, and they've come up with a new quote for a larger system for for less cost. Any questions on this slide?
Yeah, I wanted to compare this one to the Publix project that we just tabled. And what's the requirement for nitrogen replenishment on this, or is there any?
Are you saying for fertilization? Is that the question?
Yes.
They didn't particularly call out that, but the same contractor recommends that rate of fertilization for all of their green roofs. So that would potentially be in play here. Same removal rate.
Sounds like we got the same problem with this green roof that we have with the one of the Publix project.
Yeah, I agree with that, Glenn. It's a little bit of a fly in the ointment here.
Well, that's what these discussions are about.
That's what these discussions are about. I have a hard time. These are meant to be demonstration projects. I understand that cost effectiveness is going to be pretty high cost for a demonstration project, but we have some information now, I think, that says maybe this is not the kind of thing we want to be demonstrating. Not without a change in how the plants are fed, basically.
Next slide, please. Nitrogen metric was reduced by almost half with the reduced cost and the expanded footprint, but still considerably less than the previous project, but still significantly higher than a typical project supported by Rainwater Board. Next slide, please. And next slide. Next slide. And that's all I have on 515 Mill Street.
Gotcha. Any other questions or comments for discussion on this project, or sort of how we think about the green roofs at this point?
No.
I mean, I would just throw in there, we've kind of looked at these things, and I guess the two items we're wrestling with, and I'm wrestling with, is the overall cost to benefit on them. And then, the whole idea of fertilizing green roofs to me is just not appropriate. But I wanted to add that Raleigh kind of explored green roofs, the city of Raleigh, and kind of came to the conclusion that, in the south, they don't really, up north, you don't have to irrigate them. They seem to do pretty well, but down here in the south, we have to irrigate those. And we just kind of determined that they're probably not an appropriate stormwater management tool in the southeast for the climate we have. So I'm wondering if we just need to revisit that whole idea of green roofs. It's something we support. I hate to do that to these people that are in the middle of this process, but looking at these two, it's kind of slapping us in the face that we've got an issue we've got to deal with. Are we going to support green roofs or not?
I don't feel too bad about the project that's already built, but have some sympathy for someone who approached the city with an idea thinking they were, doing the right thing. But like Glenn says, these discussions are meant to sort of discover these aspects of the project. So
I would like to jump in real quick. I know, Glenn, you had a question about the, I think it was Glenn who had the question about what the state's MDC had for fertilization, or maybe it was Evan. Sorry if I, while y'all were talking, I did pull up and it says, state's MDC reads that slow release fertilizer may be applied during establishment while plants are actively growing. Once plants are established, fertilizer addition is unlikely needed and is typically not recommended. That's verbatim from the NCDEQ's MDC on green roofs.
Yeah, that was my thinking, that they didn't support fertilizing those once they're installed, kind of like the buffer rule.
Yeah, so I think where I was starting to think was, do we need, does staff need us to take a conclusive denial action on this? But with that additional information from the MDC, maybe it's better if we just leave these sitting. I don't know. I'm open to.
Yeah, go ahead, Wayne.
Yeah, we if you want to leave these sitting, we'd be glad to do additional research. Clearly, as evidenced here, these types of projects are not as cost effective as other types of Raleigh Rainwater Rewards projects, that the payback is much better. This program is getting a lot more interest. So, Justin's done a good job marketing the program. So we're getting a lot more interest and opportunities of a broad variety of projects. So it may be that we start looking more closely at this metric in terms of ranking and prioritizing projects, and the green roofs in general clearly would not score as well using that approach. So we'd be glad to bring back some ideas and proposals back to the commission for your further consideration in any modifications that we want to make in how this program is executed.
What if you looked at normalizing the reimbursement rate?
Yeah, that's certainly a good idea. Yeah, we could limit up the metric perhaps on a cost per pound removed and have a cap. That'd be another.
Yeah, there should be a way to compare project to project, and like has been stated, green roofs tend to be considerably more expensive. So if somebody wants to do one, they likely need to be reimbursed at a much lower rate. That way you're leveling the playing field.
Mm-hmm. Good thought.
And that'll stretch the city's dollars farther.
I kind of agree with that concept, but we set some sort of threshold where the city will reimburse up to a certain cost per pound removed or something like that. Above that, if an owner still wants to pursue a green roof or something that's far more expensive than a traditional stormwater control, and they can do that, but they're going to get compensated or contribution from the city up to a certain level.
Yeah, I think that'd be really helpful to see some options for how we might restructure green roofs or establish some type of thresholds where a certain level of nitrogen treatment retention is not reached. So maybe January, February, is that reasonable?
Yes, maybe February would be a good target given the holidays.
Okay, yeah.
If that works.
Let's put that on the agenda for February then.
Okay. Yeah, good feedback. We appreciate it.
Yeah, Justin, thank you very much for your efforts working with those two folks that were interested in having those projects move forward, and we may pick that back up in the future.
And guidance on how to field these applications.
Yeah.
I was just saying, if those people get in touch with you, just remind them that you're just the messenger. Don't shoot you.
Yeah.
Let SMAC take the heat.
Well, and to go back to the point before that these are demonstration projects. You know, when I look at some of these things, the cost per acre treated, $1 million an acre. The fiscal conservative in me says, why don't we just buy land? But these are demonstration projects. So we want these to be showcases and examples of what people should do, but it's also, like in this case, a great opportunity for us to learn what might not be appropriate. And we perhaps don't want to see a lot more of. So, you know, you learn by trial and error, right? Not by trial and success. Not to say this is an error at all, but Justin, I hope you know we appreciate your efforts on this. And this, I think, is, you know, positive development for the city to have this discussion and look at this.
Feedback on how to field these green roof project applications.
Justin, I'm sorry. I think your mic cut out there. What was that last thing you said?
Just thanking the commission for their guidance on how to field the green roof application. Appreciate the feedback.
Gotcha. Yep. Thanks, Justin. Wayne, have you had any public comments come through the chat box or other avenues that could be mentioned here?
I have not seen anything in the chat box, and pulling up my email, I do not see anything there either. I think we're good to go.
Cool. Sounds good. So at this point, any other items, things for discussion, final thoughts or comments from commission members before we close it out? All right, I'm not seeing anything at the moment, so I move to adjourn the meeting. Is there a second? All right, I got multiple seconds. We'll go with Mr. Carper. All in favor? Sounds good. That's unanimous, Wayne. Thank you very much for everybody's time today, and look forward to seeing you in the new year.
Yep, thanks everybody. Thanks to all the hard work staff.
Thanks, everybody.
Appreciate it. Happy holidays, everyone.
Take care, guys.
Bye, folks.